Chapter 106. Up north of North that morning, Alden had a plyometric session with Bobby and the guy who'd been analyzing how his movement traits stressed his body. They'd roped off a section of the building's marble-floored foyer just for him because they wanted to watch him on different types of ground, and they hadn't tried marble yet. He was doing his best not to feel self-conscious while he jumped up and down on progressively higher boxes. Regular jumping. Magic jumping. Higher, Alden. Faster, Alden. Ignore all the superheroes getting their smoothies, Alden. There's an actual hyperbole watching me hop around. That's not strange at all. She was a spunky-looking girl with teal hair. Well, not a girl, he corrected himself. Isn't she like 40? She was a U-type, and in English, her name was Popstar. Alden had always found it concerning. Laying waste to acreage with falling magic sparkles. Awesome. But calling yourself Popstar while you did it? Could she really be trusted to aim her magic sparkles at the right spots? Let's get some more height on the next one, said Bobby, moving a mat out of the way. She had brought it to toss in front of him in case he overshot a box on a high jump. Tell me if anything starts to hurt. While Alden was checking to make sure the enamel rabbit pin he was using as his preserved object was still tucked deeply in the pocket of his shorts, a text message from Luke popped up. He'd just woken up, and he was booking the privacy booth for them to have their word chain tutoring session. Do you want a creepy one, a snobby one, or an underwater one? Why are those the only three options? Why are those options at all? When he heard the phrase privacy booth, he'd assumed it would be similar to an office cubicle or a restaurant booth. Luke seemed like someone whose idea of creepy might be really creepy. Isn't there a normal variety? What about one in the back of a right shop? They'll check our molars for explosives and teach us a secret knock. Snobby sounds good, Alden said immediately. If molar checking happened at these places, he wanted the least creepy molar check available. Throw your hips into it. A voice shouted across the foyer. You can go higher, kid. Popstar is yelling at me, Alden told Lute. He tried to ignore her. Then he realized that ignoring was probably not the way to go with one of the most powerful people in the world. So he smiled and waved instead. R.I.P., said Lute. It was nice knowing you. When she glitters you to ash, can't I have your room? Line of asterisks. Alden survived his gym session with only a little more input from a rank 1 than he would have liked, and afterward, he set off on a rental bike for a skate park where Lute was hanging out with Hoyu. It was a gorgeous day for Nzidora, blue sky, sunshine, breezy. People were walking around in flip-flops and tank tops and pretending it was actually warm instead of just warm enough. Lexi thinks the rest of the planet isn't for us, and it never will be, Alden thought as he pedaled. He felt so unsettled by the sentiment, and he couldn't understand why he did. He was perfectly aware of what Nzidora was. He'd had multiple conversations with people about it. A lengthy government letter was still in his inbox, announcing the official date his U.S. citizenship had expired. Maybe it was the way Lexi had delivered the opinion. Like it wasn't really up for debate. Just a simple truth. Hey, system, he said, as he wove around a stroller that had been parked in the bike lane outside a clothing store. Pull up my exit letter. The one that de-citizens me. Text to audio. He didn't know exactly what he was trying to figure out as he listened to the message read itself. He wanted to judge the tone, maybe, and it wasn't the easiest thing to do. The letter sounded like it had been crafted by a roomful of writers who'd been threatened with execution if there was a single negative connotation toward any party. There was no line in there that explicitly said, "Fuck off, Alden Thorne. The country just works better for the rest of us without you in it." It was, of course, professional and full of language that implied he was a good person and should be proud of himself. They were confident he would use his extraordinary gifts in protection of and service to our United Nations of Earth and all other known peoples throughout the universe. Yeah, it's pretty final. He was surprised they'd thrown the other species into the mix, though. It felt like an unusual show of solidarity with the other resource worlds in the first place, and in the second, this was a letter about how Alden had to live on Nzidora now. Stay there. That's the spot where we put the people with the extraordinary gifts. Good boy. It really didn't have anything to do with the other known peoples throughout the universe at all. So that's it. They couldn't manage to make living on an isolated island sound like my noble duty, so they talk about how I'm protecting and serving as an avowed instead and hope I won't notice the two are entirely separate things. Not surprising. Nothing new. It just sounded different a few hours after he'd heard Lexi describe Anzidora as the place that actually wants us. He looked around him. A girl in a university t-shirt was in the lane ahead, using shaping gestures to power her bicycle instead of the pedals. On the street, people were making full use of their running licenses, whipping around cars and motorcycles. And he'd spotted Bedlam Beldam on his way to the gym, soaring around above the drone traffic layer on her broom glider. He had taken a quick video for Bo. It was also Anisidron. So Apex. A couple of minutes later, he reached a small skate park. He racked the bike and took in the scenery. It had sounded like his roommates were just going to hang out together, and Hoyu was going to teach Lute how to use a board. But their plans must have changed. He saw Hoyu, but there was also a large and peculiar assortment of their classmates present. Khan was there, so it was probably his doing. Lexi's brother went through the day picking up people like they were Easter eggs. Maricel, Vandy, Tayet, and Everly were all playing around with a single skateboard. It was obvious they'd never used one before. Heloisa was doing conspicuous kickflips in Mehdi's line of sight, and he was pretending not to see her while he went up and down a ramp. Hoyu was on a board at the edge of the park, animatedly explaining something to a watching Khan and Jeffy. The girls were closest, so Alden headed over to them. If I ice the top of it and use my skill to stick myself to it, do you think that will make me better or worse? Everly asked Tayet and Vandy. She had her arms crossed over her chest and she was watching Maricel skate away from them across a flat section of concrete. You might damage Hoyu's board. Vandy's hands were making a pressing motion down by her sides. Alden looked around for whatever patch of air she was working on. Vandy was almost always doing something with her magic. It took him a while to spot it today. Her shoulder-length hair didn't seem to be moving in the breeze like everyone else's. Hi, Vandy. Are you shaping the air around your face? Blue-gray eyes fixed on him. Yes, she said. I'm practicing stilling rather than moving today. Maricel is practicing soil compression with the dirt in her pockets. Everly is thinking about freezing skateboards. And Tayet is taking a day off. For rest. Everly shook her head. Oof, thought Alden. The judgment in her tone. I can't throw darts around out here in public. Tayet protested. It'll scare people. They're weapons, and they're little. It's hard for anyone to know if I've got safety blunting on them or not. Vandy was the kind of person who asked you with utter seriousness how you were going to overcome your rabbit disadvantages so that she could make plans for shoring up your weaknesses if you happened to be in battle together 15 years from now. It had to be tough to be her friend sometimes. Not everyone wants to practice every minute of every day, Everly told her. Weekends are healthy. Alden's not practicing right now. Yes, he is, said Vandy. Alden looked at her in surprise. He's almost always practicing, Vandy informed the other two. It's just that his skill is subtle, and you can only tell he's using it if you're watching him walk across ground element surfaces. Or examining his pockets. Maricel was skating back toward them. Her pixie cut had gotten a dye job. She had a few small pink streaks at the back of her neck. She smiled as she joined them. Are you really time-stopping something right now? Tayet asked Alden. A few people almost always referred to Alden's power with temporal language rather than using the words he himself usually did when he was talking about it: preservation, freezing, shielding. They all pretty much knew what the skill did by now. He thought the vocabulary difference had to do with whether he had tried to explain it to them himself or if Constantine had gotten to them first. The adjuster liked talking about time magic for obvious reasons. I'm just glad Maricel is a nice person who doesn't tell people about the Pickles misunderstanding. Pickle Man would be a difficult image to escape from. What are we talking about? Maricel asked brightly. Vandy says she can tell when Alden's practicing his skill, said Tayet. Everly was staring at Alden's butt. Not my back pockets, he clarified. I almost never have an item there. Because his skill wouldn't work if he accidentally sat on his object instead of letting it sit on him. No, said Vandy. He keeps objects in his front pockets if he doesn't have them in his hand or his bag. Usually his hoodie. I always check to see if he's practicing an intro to other worlds. So I'm going to have to make sure I don't stick anything too weird in the pockets from now on. You could just ask me. It's good to examine other avowed and determine when their powers are in use, Vandy explained. You're one of the best people in our class to practice observation on. Now they were all staring at him. He doesn't have a hoodie on today, said Everly. The front pockets look normal, said Maricel, examining his jeans. Maybe it's one of his shoelaces? Tayet bent over to poke at Alden's feet. He could do it to keep a shoe from coming untied. I hadn't thought of that one yet. I know he is something, said Vandy. He has a trait. It's tied to the skills use like a lot of rabbit traits. It makes him walk differently on ground when he is protecting something. She's right, Alden admitted, digging his hand into his front pocket and producing the enamel pin. I can cut the trait off, but I usually don't bother. I carry this sometimes when I just want to practice and I don't have anything I really need to preserve. Or I pin it to my shirt. It's small, so it doesn't get in the way. Oh, it's a bunny, said Everly. They gave them to all the rabbits in intake. Maricel looked at him for permission, then reached out with a finger to poke the pin on his palm. I really can't touch it. It looks like I'm touching it. I'm touching something. But it's not the pin. You're touching a layer of protective magic. Vandy looked very satisfied. All right, Tayet said with a sigh. I'll practice later. Not here where I might accidentally poke out somebody's eye. Right. Have you guys seen Luke Volra? I'm supposed to be meeting him here, but... He trailed off as a distinctly uncomfortable shift occurred. Vandy stiffened up like a board. Tayet's lips pursed. Everly wrinkled her nose. Maricel hadn't noticed. She was still rubbing the preserved pin curiously with her finger. Why are you hanging out with him? Everly asked. He's my roommate. Yeah. I know. Hoyu's living with him, too. He was here when we got here, Tayet said slowly. And then he left. Alden frowned at them. He's tutoring me. Everly scrunched her nose again. Are you learning music? Word chains, said Alden. I need to try that, said Maricel, looking up. I've never done one. Let us teach you, Vandy said immediately. I know two different ones, said Tayet. Maricel suddenly caught the vibe. She looked between Alden and her roommates. I don't mind teaching you, too, Vandy said to Alden. It's good you want to learn some. Supplemental magics will be particularly important for you. Holy shit, they must hate loot. They hadn't said anything terrible, but Alden hadn't even realized Tayet had a critical bone in her body. She got nervous if people argued during breaks in gym. And he rather liked Everly. She was super tough and hardworking. And Vandy had just offered to tutor him. Instead of saying, will the expert tutor me, too? Which would have been more in line with what he thought of her character. If they were known dicks, like Winston or Mehdi, he'd probably have said something cutting. But they weren't. And Maricel was here. And these were the people she was trying to make friends with. Evacuate, he decided. Thanks, but I'm grateful Luke's teaching me. He's been taking time out of his schedule to tutor me all week, and he's amazing at it. I'll track him down. Lute, where are you? He texted quickly. Skate Park still. I'm here. I don't see you. Already? Meet me on the side farthest from the street. By the trees. Found him, said Alden, even though he hadn't yet. Bye, guys. He spun and headed away from the street, walking along the edge of the park to steer clear of the skateboarders. A second later, he saw Lute drop out of a tree and take a seat on a metal railing that marked the boundary between the park and a walking trail. When Alden joined them, Lute said, "We've got half an hour until our car comes." Car? We're going in style because we can. And because my boss is paying for it. He nodded toward the park. You want to go hang out with Hoyu and your hero program friends while we wait? The girls Alden had just left behind had their heads together. He wondered if Maricela was getting some kind of loot-related gossip right now. Are you going to hang out with them? Alden asked. Loot pulled his knees up so that he was sitting on the railing like a gargoyle. He was wearing his safety pin pants and a t-shirt with a Jolly Roger flag on it. It wasn't the first time Alden had seen him boldly go for pirate-themed clothing with the eye patch. Not my thing, he said after a moment. Well, I'm tired from jumping on boxes, so I'm good over here, too. Loot smiled. Tell me about meeting Plopstar then. She cheered me on while I exercised. Or maybe it was heckling. One or the other. Normally, Bobby would have asked her to stop. The gym has a no-bothering policy. Don't tell me you expected your personal trainer to yell at a hyperbole for you. Of course not. I was just noting the difference. A kooky hyperbole, no less. A thought suddenly occurred to Alden. Do you think you'll be one someday? Huh? A hyperbole, said Alden. I just realized you're probably the person I know who has the best chance. No. Said Loot, gripping the railing and staring at him. What a thing to say. You are super strong and you're only 15, Alden pointed out. I know you're not a unique, and nobody except the rank-uppers have got confirmation about how the system makes the upgrade choices. But power has to be a major part of it. Surely people mention it to you sometimes. Luke coughed. No. They don't. That's probably because most of them think I'm jerking everyone around with a second S. But even if they did believe me, it doesn't mean anything. S's get second and third S-rank talents. It doesn't mean you're about to hyperbolize. Not 15-year-olds, thought Alden. But Loot was looking wild-eyed, so he let it drop. They watched the skaters for a while, paying more attention to the older people who were doing tricks with their magic than to Alden's hero program classmates. While Loot was saying that someone who could float was way less impressive than professional non-avowed skateboarders, Alden got a notification email he'd been waiting for and dreading. New update from Barfine Environments. When he clicked the link, it took him to Manon's main social media page, where, instead of the usual photo post filled with luxury goods and interiors, her away notice had appeared. It was an animation of a gold hourglass with the words currently designing for clients on the Triplanets beneath it. She'd been summoned. He watched the hourglass turn over. He knew from looking at older posts that she was usually gone for at least a few hours. So, this is our first chance to go through with the plan since we decided what the right plan was. He sighed so heavily that Luke looked over at him. You good? I have to send a bunch of messed up cult members messages letting them know I have observed the fact that they are in a messed up cult and advising them to go promptly to the nearest sway or mind healer to have themselves checked out for their own safety. What the hell? Said Loot, tilting his head and giving Alden a confused look. I need to ask. Do you just wake up every morning and try to make your life bonkers in a brand new way? This is the first bonkers thing since I've met you. Do you want me to give you a blow-by-blow of your past week? You did attend classes like a normal person. Sort of. But usually, prompting me to place a phone call to our redactor on your behalf would be enough action for a couple of months, don't you think? Alden stared at him. Would it? Luke huffed. I knew you didn't think of it that way at all, which was why I wanted to do it for you in the first place. And then you had your own interesting phone call a couple of days ago. And now this. You were so busy, man. I thought the past few days had been relaxing, Alden said. Actually, I know that they were relaxing for me. The system had totally pointed out how relaxing and pleasant his week had been before it trapped him in his old school counselor's office and threatened him with levels. I've even been sleeping at night. Oh yes. Sleeping at night, of all times, is proof that you're taking it easy. He slid off the railing and punched Alden lightly on the arm. Come on. Our ride's here. You have got to tell me about why you're involved with a cult. I'm excited. Living with you is exciting. Let's go spend 5,000 gold on a tutoring session. How much? Probably more than that actually. I'm not sure what the little gifts cost. The what? Line of asterisks. They got in a car with tinted windows and a driver who spoke not a word to either of them. He took them to a parking garage where there was another driver and another car with tinted windows. They didn't transfer vehicles. They just waited for a few minutes, and then both cars drove out of the garage together and turned in opposite directions down the street. Loot, is all of this necessary? Alden hissed. We're going to talk to each other, not commit crimes. Loot was sitting cross-legged in a seat, eating a chocolate bar that had been provided in the car's snack basket. Call me Mr. Blura. That's my crime name. Alden snatched a bag of peanuts from the basket and started eating them nervously. Chill. It's just part of the experience. If we were actually doing crime or concerned about people knowing we were having a private meeting, then we'd be doing something completely different. You can arrange a much more secret rendezvous if you've got enough money and put enough forethought into it. Teleportation is what the best bad guys use. Seriously? Luke nodded. The allotment the system gives Anzidora is enough for the government to sell local rides. Just not that many. The car made 2 more stops at locations where it could have put them out without them being spotted before it arrived at their actual destination. It was another parking garage. This one was for Luxury Mall in Midtown Apex, not that far from where they'd started. Alden raised an eyebrow at Loot as they followed a slender woman in a tight black pencil skirt down a service corridor. She looked like she was in her early 20s. When they reached the end, she turned to them. My profile, greater than she said in Spanish. A moment later, her full avowed profile appeared in front of them. She was a D-rank sway with nothing but a lie detection ability. Do you consent to me using my powers to confirm the honesty of your answers? Greater than. Yep, said Loot. Okay, said Alden. He felt her target him almost at once. Being targeted was even more subtle now that he wasn't suffering from post-affixation sensitivity, but he still noticed it when he wasn't very distracted or when he was a little on edge. Do you have any intention of damaging the privacy booth you are about to enter? Greater than. No, he said. Do you have any intention of leaving a device of any kind behind when you leave? Greater than. I don't. Do you have any intention of betraying your companion's secrets to any entity? Greater than. Alden looked at Loot in surprise. Was this a standard question or one he'd requested specifically? No. Loot answered the same 3 in the same way. Both parties are honest. She cracked a smile for the first time since they'd met her in the garage. You'll have to trust me on that since you're not traveling with your own personal sways. To Loot, she added, the packages that arrived for you are waiting inside. Then she knocked on the wall behind her 6 times, and it swung open to reveal a room that definitely didn't belong in this dull back corridor. It's a replica of a suite on a European luxury train, Loot said as soon as the door closed behind them. I'm glad you picked Snobby. It was compact, but the quality of everything made it feel like it wasn't a closet. The walls were glossy wood with decorative geometric inlay. Light came from glowing sconces and a line of panels along one wall designed to look like windows with semi-transparent shades pulled down. The tiny seating area was just a green velvet chair, a cream-colored loveseat, and a side table with a stack of packages on it. Right behind the chair, a queen-sized bed with an inlaid headboard filled the rest of the room, and if they squeezed past the foot of it, there was a tiny bathroom behind a sliding door. Privacy spaces tend to be small, Luke said. It's expensive to magically shield them from the million different ways people can pry, I think. So it's smart if they're designed to look like cool places that are supposed to be cramped. The underwater one was going to be a little submarine. Luke kicked off his shoes and flung himself on the brocade bedspread. Do they all have beds? It seems to be a common feature. He clucked his tongue before rolling off the bed and stepping past Alden to examine the boxes on the table. We've got this place for 6 hours, so if you need to send your messages or something, go ahead. I've got to look through the supplies before we get started to make sure I understand what it is Parvatator expects me to actually do with you. While I'm opening these, please do tell me about your cult problem. I am incredibly interested in people's cult problems. Alden took off his own shoes and sat down on the love seat. It was so soft that it took him a second to stop appreciating the fabric with his fingers before he spoke. If there was an avowed talent that was capable of mind control and it wasn't known as that kind of power, how bad would it be for the people who had it if the news got out? Lute was undoing the latches on the front of a leather case. It depends. There's plenty of magic that skirts the edges of mind control, and people usually don't freak out about it. Everyone knows if you whack a peel up far enough, interesting things can happen before the system cuts you off or starts offering you alternatives. And there are some iffy spell impressions outside of sway. As long as it's still in a gray area where you can't say for sure the person used magic directly on your actual thoughts. I'm 99% sure she does something directly, said Alden. I don't think it's the main way she controls her minions, necessarily. But it exists. I was really suspicious of her one day, and I knew she'd behave badly toward me. Then a couple of days later it was like that knowledge was at the back of my thoughts. My friends had to remind me that I had a problem with her, and I'm not usually forgetful about people who creep me out. And I was having a picnic with her cult once, and they were all being nice to me and I was being nice to them, and then they just started strongly disliking me again mid-supper. And she totally convinced a lady with a busted leg that she was too shy to ask the medic for help. Luke looked up. Yeah. That's less gray area and more actual mind control. It would be awful for the people who had the talent without knowing it. Alden groaned. I don't want to ruin the skill's reputation, but if the people I'm trying to help take me seriously, it'll probably come out. I feel terrible about it. It's not your fault someone found a dangerous use for a skill. Luke shut the case and opened a carved wooden box. This kind of thing happens. Anyway, if it's got a mind control component, it's going to be news eventually. If it's today or 20 years from now, the only difference is when it gets ruined for people. And there could be someone taking it right this second who wouldn't if they knew it would make them look suspicious for the rest of their life. So you might be saving more people than you destroy. Could we not use the word destroy? What's the skill? It's Taylor environment. You know, Luke spun toward him. Shit. That's bad. I was assuming it was something obscure. That skill is so popular. I know. It's one of the sure thing skills for C-rank rabbits. I know. Everyone loves that skill. It makes the world comfortable. And it makes people so much money. The woman who's misusing it is older. Probably one of the first people to acquire it, before it even got really popular here on Earth. Oh. Luke bit his lower lip and furrowed his brow. Has the skill found its top yet? The guy who really popularized it says his is at level 14 now. So probably around there. So it's a skill that gets fat, too. That makes it more desirable. But it should make you feel better. Why? You say the person you met is one of the first to ever select it. She could have topped it off a decade or more ago. I'm sure there aren't any C-rank rabbits running around at level 4 or 5 who could make you too shy to get help when you were injured. And since it's such a beloved talent, it might end up being a situation where people with it just have to be more open about their profiles from now on to prove they haven't taken it really high. It'll still be upsetting for them, but not life-ruining. The Artonans might even change the skill for future human users. Wouldn't count on it though. Sounds like the mind control might be a desirable part of it, if it wasn't a bad person using it that way. Alden threw his legs up onto the love seat. You think they wanted to do that? You think they designed one of their own favorite skills for their most frequently summoned class haphazardly? Luke countered. Tailor environment is about arranging things so that they're exactly where someone likes for them to be, right? Say you're a wizard about to do some stressful wizard job. You snap your fingers, and a rabbit appears. They clean your potion kitchen or whatever, prep your equipment in the perfect way, and put all your tools exactly where they'll be the most useful to you. Then, before you send them off with a pocket full of our gold, You have them tuck your doubts and stresses behind task-focused thoughts so you can get down to business. Like having someone put the files in your head in order. It would be great. I assumed she was pushing the skill way out of line from its intended use, Alden said. She sounds like a freak. She touches brain without permission. If telling her victims makes the word spread, it's a shame for all the nice rabbits. But sometimes Avowed just have to deal with people thinking our powers are icky. And maybe, if it does work like I just guessed, it'll be seen in a more positive light. Alden glanced back at Manon's hourglass animation. He checked his other messages just to make sure Bo wasn't back from cat space yet. Boater is getting their warnings today, he texted. Doing it the way we talked about. When you get back from your timeout, it's your turn. Then he went into his system profile and, for the first time ever, he got creative with his name. The contract didn't care what Avowed called themselves, and it didn't mind them setting their preferred name to be entirely different things for different locations, people, or situations. It was normal among some species for an individual to have tons of names, and the Artonans were used to calling aliens whatever they wanted to be called. Sending messages under false identities was frowned upon among human Avowed. Just like spam mail was frowned upon. But nobody could punish you for doing it if they couldn't prove beyond a shadow of a doubt you had. Alden changed his name to Alice. It was a decision he'd made in around a minute when he was working out the details of this plan. A female name was better for a couple of reasons. It started with A. He liked it. Probably because someone named Alice had kept him from dying recently. He set the emails to go out at staggered intervals. He'd spent hours tweaking them until they were as perfect as he could manage. Laura would receive hers in a few minutes. Half an hour later, the second would go to Chris. Then half an hour after that, to Naya. And so on. All the way to Pineda. Then he hired a courier service to deliver hard copies of the emails to all the members of the boater in a few hours, after the last one had been sent. One would also be delivered to Alden at his dorm, as if the sender was concerned about him, too. Finally, he created a special social rule for himself. Every action he had just taken had been done under the preferred name Alice, and the rule said that when referencing these past few minutes of his life the system should never call him by another name. It was a sneaky feature from a human point of view. But the system liked doling out tons of options for the most trivial things. Or maybe it was there because the humanid species had the concept of momentary names. Alden switched his name back. All the messages he'd just sent would now be from Alice. And if someone asked the system who'd sent them it would still answer Alice even though his name was now back to his original. It was secure because the systems were disinclined to tattletale. Alden hadn't always planned to send his warnings anonymously, but he decided there were significant benefits. First, Manon had predisposed the boater to dislike him. What if her brainwashing would prevent them from believing any message with his name on it? Second, if this all turned into a huge shit show, he didn't want Manon to try to sue him for defamation of character or something. She was probably going to think it was him. Cli Zhao would think it was him if the news ever reached her. The boater members, if they didn't suspect one another, would think it was him. Everyone and their uncle was going to suspect Alden Thorne, but if his name wasn't on anything, how would they ever prove it? He had even used a girl's name. Alice could have been Thwarthog, and there was no way they were going to get her onto an Zedora to say otherwise. The physical letters were being sent in case the boater people had their interfaces set to block messages from non-friends or people with recent name changes. And so that Alden would have a copy of his very own to take with him when he went to talk to Laura. He could say he'd gotten the same warning as the rest of them and use it as his opener. "I did it," he said. "I warned the cultists." He had expected to feel a sense of relief once the job was done. He was glad that he would wake up tomorrow with this task erased from his to-do list, but he also felt a little like he'd just stepped off a ledge without checking to see how far below him the ground was. Neat. That was fast. Loot could out him as the sender, but Alden didn't think that he would. If he did, if anything did, Alden would just have to stand behind the letters and say, "Yeah, it was me. Manon Barhart's people." sorry that the way she does it is going to make a whole bunch of other rabbits look bad. He hoped that a few of the boater members would go get themselves checked out. Or even just one of them. And then, with proof in official hands, the legal system could deal with it all in a graceful way. Maybe Isidora is good at this kind of thing. If they're not, then nobody else could be. The plan was in development for a while, he told Lute. Will you stay on the phone with me this evening while I go talk to one of them in person? In case she gets angry and attacks or the cult leader shows up and tries something on me. He'd promised Bo he'd have local backup. Of course. We're having a special day together anyway. Lute held out his hands. System, I need my books. A stack of books that looked like they ought to be called tomes appeared in his hands. His head barely peeked over the top of them. Impressive, aren't I? For using system storage? For having free system storage, said Lute. It's just for the books and some other job supplies, though. He turned and dropped the books onto the foot of the bed. Good thing, too. They are going to give me even more of these if I ever finish the first set. What are they? Alden asked. Most of them are full of word chains I'm supposed to be learning. Sometimes it feels like my job as an avowed is just perpetual homework. So much memorization. Alden stood and went over to look down at the book covers. These are all written in logograms. Can you read them? They get read aloud to me while I follow along. Like incredibly boring bedtime stories. To make matters worse, a lot of them aren't even in modern Artonan. They are from before the lingual unification. I was just memorizing the sounds of those ones. And then it turned out my boss was not impressed with that method even though it was working for me. So now I'm supposed to remember what all the sounds mean. You can imagine how well that's going based on our conversation classes. He rolled his eye. This. He grabbed the smallest and plainest looking of the books. It had a simple brownish-red cover that flipped open from bottom to top instead of side to side. This is what I was actually getting. I wanted to show off my homework and complain about it in the process. You can have this. Do I need to read it? Alden asked. No. It's a ledger. They gave it to me on my first day as a chainer for whenever I wanted to take a student. Lute held it out toward him, and he took it. You asked whether self-mastery was an exclusive word chain, and I told you it wasn't really. That I'd just need to vouch for you and get permission to teach it. This is the final step in me vouching for you. Giving you this means I'm taking responsibility for your word chain usage. He scratched his head. You're supposed to write down all your chains in here. And then show it to me or send me a copy through the system, so I can remind you when it's time to pay them back. Sorry. I know it's childish. Alden flipped open the book. Inside, the first page had a spot for him and Lute to both sign their names. There was a line in logograms down one side that talked about following sacred paths. The second page was a grid. Despite the thick paper and some more poetic language sprinkled around, it was quite simple. There were spaces for chain names, casting dates, and finishing dates. You want me to write down everything I use? Just what I teach you. If you wanted to write down more common ones when you use them, too, that would be a good thing for me. Parvadator is going to ask me about you all the time since he's decided you're the best, and you having a fuller ledger would make him very happy. I don't mind doing this, said Alden, thinking it through. I can't imagine why it would be a problem for me. But I don't understand why it's necessary. Word chains pay themselves off if you don't pay them off in a timely fashion, right? This is one of the things I was happy my boss ordered me to teach you about. The duty that I totally knew I'd get assigned when I called him. Word chains to land the debt on you. If they're healthy. Healthy. Let's sit down, said Lute, throwing himself at the green velvet chair. This is only going to take a second to explain, but then we have to have our tutoring session and that's going to take ages. Try not to get into trouble for the next few hours, alright? One mind control cult per day. Chapter 107 Word chains are the original form of magic, according to the Palace of Unbreaking. I would take that with an ocean full of salt, because the palace's stance is always that word chains are better than everything else and you might be an actual demon if you disagree. Loot was sitting sideways in the green velvet chair, stretching his fingers one by one. Behind him, the light panel on the wall was flickering slightly behind its shade, as if the privacy booth really was a train car and a changing landscape lay just beyond the fabric. Anyway, they are way old. And they work based on a simple concept, equal exchange. I give you my sense of balance for 3 hours. You give me yours for 3 hours. I take your strength today. You take mine tomorrow. You told me they were common sense, Alden said from where he was sitting on the love seat. And that it might chain her common sense class. Luke nodded. Alaya wants to obscure every minute detail partially because it's so simple. I'm not an evil old politician, but I think she's afraid people will realize that we don't actually get. Ah. That's still an ass tattoo matter. Back on topic, my boss says the more people make successful exchanges, the more solid the chain becomes, until it's so strong it's doable for even less accomplished people. A person says these magic words and they get peace of mind. Even little kids and species without fingers can make some of them work. He pointed at Alden's ledger. But what happens when a word chain is brand new? Or when it's been forgotten? What happens if nobody ever uses it? Or if everybody only wants to use one half and so they never speak the other and always let it snap back? Alden's eyes widened. That's so obvious. I know it is. But we take word chains for granted. Like they're light switches maybe. Not that many people sit down to ponder how the electricity got to them when they flip the switch. My boss tells me that our Tonans, as a society, used to be very serious about word chain maintenance. Ancient aliens would perform multiple ones every day, like it was a chore they had to do to keep the lights on for themselves and their grandchildren. Now, even though they are still in use across the triplanets, they are not being cared for with the same level of dedication. So tons of them have broken, or they're on the verge of breaking, or they're just weakening. He reached over to grab the wooden case on the table beside him. The Palace of Unbreaking is dedicated to word chain preservation. Scary dedicated. As part of that, they do their best to restrict access to word chains based on their fragility. They want everyone to do word chains all the time. But only if they're going to do them in the right way. So when chains start to fail, they try to make sure they're only being taught and shared with responsible people who are going to strengthen them instead of weakening them further. Alden lifted his new ledger from his lap. So you're supposed to make sure I'm not stacking up tons of debt. That's right. And don't lie, man. If you miss listing properly completed ones every now and then it's fine. Or if you let a few snap and have to fess up to it, that's fine, too. But don't neglect to mention the snap ones. And don't say you completed one fair and square if you didn't. I wouldn't. Luke nodded. Parvadator has an absurdly high opinion of you, so I think you've probably got a lot more leeway than normal. And they don't demand perfection from beginners anyway. But the thing is, if you do become a problematic user, there can be serious consequences for you after you've signed this with me. You wouldn't like them at all. Alden looked back at the first page of the ledger. Are the spaces for the teacher and student names some kind of contract? No. They told me it was more like an honesty pledge. It won't make either of us do anything or prevent us from doing anything. It's just an official record of the fact that you agreed to be a responsible word chain user and I agreed to be responsible for you. I send a copy to the Palace of Unbreaking as soon as you sign. If you get caught avoiding debt too often, they take away one of your rights, and if I get caught neglecting you or letting you cheat, I'm pretty sure I get yelled at. And they don't let me have another student until I've sucked up a lot. What right do I lose? Luke looked uncomfortable. You know how when I shared the word chain with you, you had to agree to it through the system? Alden nodded. That one. He took in Alden's expression. No. Don't think I'm horrible. I wouldn't actually do anything to you, it's just that I'd be able to. And so would the rest of my family. I don't think you're horrible, Alden said. He cleared his throat. I was surprised. That's all. You look like someone who's stuck in a tiny room with a serial killer. No, I don't. You, Alden tossed one of the silk throw pillows at him. Loot, it's fine. I wondered about the system permission thing when it popped up. It's not like sways have to get our permission before they do shit to us. It's not like Lexi has to get permission before stabbing us with her. That's not how avowed classes usually work, so I thought it was strange that you had to use a consent form before laying a word chain on me. Loot was still eyeing him nervously. The Palace of Unbreaking won't let chainers bestow a word chain, whether it's beneficial or not, on unwilling people under normal circumstances. It's counter to their entire ethos. Hazel didn't have to get my permission before she sniped me, though. The fact that she was calling in a debt that already belonged to Alden must have made it all right in the palace's eyes. Or else she got to play by her own rules for some reason. Your class would be something if you didn't have that restriction. Alden looked over at the pile of books on the bed. You could lay endless types of disaster and reap endless positives in return. But I can't do that. And I wouldn't. I believe you. Alden felt like he was missing something though. Why does your grandmother not want people to understand even the basics of why word chains are restricted? I don't see any benefit for her. A lot of people seem to dislike you guys because they think you're word chain hoarders who refuse to share with others so that you can maintain your power. But you actually just work for the hoarders. And the hoarders are hoarding for a good reason. Well, said Loot. We do hoard. Some. There are a lot that the palace wouldn't mind people using that just haven't filtered down to earth yet. Mostly odd effects. You could probably crack open one of those books and find a dozen. And we do get access to some particularly strong, delicate, or difficult ones just for ourselves. Alaya, for example, has the gloss. Which she does not mind the family telling people is very extra awesome and only for her. Imagine that. Why don't other avowed who visit the palace come back with all this info, then? Oh. Now this is interesting. I can answer this question but only in a misleading fashion. Your friend the wizard would be able to answer it fully. Luke looked like he very much wanted Alden to ask. What's the misleading reason? Luke rose to his feet and looked down his nose at Alden. No avowed but chainers may work for the palace. I'm terribly sorry, pleb. You're never going to be summoned there, so you'll have to take my word for all matters word chain related. Alden narrowed his eyes. So that's it. They don't summon anyone but you guys to word chain central. We're special, Luke said in the same snobby voice. The Artonans love us so much, and we're so special. Never? None of the wizards there have ever wanted a rabbit masseuse. They don't want a rabbit floor cleaner to make sure the people who prostrate themselves before you don't get their faces dirty? Luke pointed at him. You say prostration one more time and I'm not signing that ledger with you. Alden grinned. Prost. Oh look, said Luke in an airy voice, Parvadathur sent you a present. He'll want to know how you liked it. Here you go. He grabbed one of the cases and presented it to Alden with a flourish. Alden opened it. There was a big white papaya-shaped fruit inside. It's a wavy fruit, he said. You recognize it from pictures? Good. I've had one before. A juiced one anyway. Luke tilted his head. A real one? Alden nodded. What the hell? I thought for sure it was just my family. They told me you basically have to have some kind of ritual event to even get your hands on. Never mind. It's you. Your oddities keep stacking. Should you be saying that to me? Eat up, my new beholden one, in a fashion that honors your Artonan ancestors. I don't have any of those. Parvadathur does not care. Luke smirked. You're supposed to eat the whole thing. No utensils. Wasting the skin or the seeds is forbidden in this instance. No juice. Whatever you can gnaw out of its fibrous hide before swallowing. It's kind of large. It wasn't quite ham-sized, but it was close. I actually felt a little sorry for you when I first saw it. Luke said, staring down at the white fruit. He was trying to be generous. You can do it while I teach. You should be able to manage it in a few hours, right? Do I really have to eat the whole thing? That's going to make me sick, isn't it? Fine. I'll help. I don't want to lie to Parvadathur about what happened to it, and I can spin us sharing it into something nice for him. He pointed at Alden. "I get the best bites." Line of asterisks. The wevy was tasty. It just wasn't fun to chew up, and the quantity was intimidating. Alden could see why juice had become the standard way of consuming it rather than whole fruit. While his jaws worked, he listened closely to the words of the chain as Luke repeated them for him. It was significantly longer than the weaker word chains he was used to, and poetic, as he'd anticipated. There were 6 problem words. He could say them, but Luke assured him he wasn't saying them well enough. It was going to take a while to get those right and then a longer while to sync up the hand signs with the words properly. "You promised you wouldn't be angry if it didn't work," Luke reminded him. "You're still worried about that?" Alden asked after he'd swallowed his latest mouthful. "I'm not going to be upset." They'd both signed their names in the ledger, using a brush dipped in dark green ink. Alden was supposed to keep the ink and use it for his record-taking. "I'm grateful you're tutoring me," he added. "If anything, I feel guilty for asking you now that I know it's more serious for you to teach someone than you implied." Luke couldn't have another student for restricted word chains until he and Alden had both proven themselves responsible, Alden by not lying about accidents on his chaining ledgers and Luke by making himself available to help complete a chain when necessary. The less frequently used a word chain was, the shorter the time frame before the debt came due. Very fragile ones needed to be paid off almost immediately. According to Luke, self-mastery was currently running at about 3 weeks. But in the interest of looking responsible, Alden would be trying to pay it off much sooner. If he couldn't complete the payments himself, either due to miscast or the word chain just refusing to land for him, Luke would be using his skill to bestow the debt to him so that their ledger stayed balanced. "Don't worry about it," said Luke. "When I found out I got to have students and realized I could weave around some of my tattoo restrictions because of it, I thought I was going to be the vulgar family member who spread knowledge and ruined Alia's monopoly. Then I realized most people suck too much to teach. They suck at doing the word chains. And they suck even more at wanting to pay them back. I've taught people non-restricted ones before and watched them, and I arrived at the conclusion that I couldn't be friends and teach them the kind of chains I'd be obligated to monitor. Aren't they just hurting themselves if they make the chain slap them with a debt at a random moment? People procrastinate on things they don't like. And they all imagine their future selves being a more self-sacrificing version of who they are. They want the good right now, and the payback feels like a problem for another person. So they take it. And then it turns out future them doesn't miraculously want to spend several hours being weak or frightened or clumsy either. He went back to showing Alden the various gestures and words. Alden set his half-finished wevy aside and repeated them after him. Toward the end of their 6-hour window, the gremlin was starting to take an interest. "I think I'm getting it," Alden said after finishing several attempts on his own. Luke was draped over the foot of the bed, head hanging down toward the floor while he watched. "I think you are, too. Is it a problem for me to cast this in public? Do I need to hide out in bathroom stalls or something?" "It's a gray area," said Luke. "You can cast it wherever you want, but I generally cast in private until I'm good enough to mutter or even abbreviate them. I think if other avowed to pick them up from us and use them incorrectly, the palace might assign a chainer to give them a talking to. And that doesn't sound like fun for me. Obviously don't go out and have a tutoring session like this with someone else until you've gotten permission to be a teacher, too." "And, I get permission to teach at some point?" Alden asked in surprise. "I assume you do. The palace lets all of their Artonan members teach restricted chains once they've made it out of the novice echelons, so I don't see why they wouldn't let a human do it, especially if his heart contains all the light of the sun within it." "Prostration," said Alden. "Prostration. Prostration. Just don't say it in front of the girls, jerk." Luke looked like he was on the verge of falling off the bed. His blonde hair was brushing the rug. "Do you like Natalie?" "Yeah, of course. Of course," he says. "I have both my eyes." Oh, he meant like that. "We're friends. I'm friends with all of them." "I know. But if I'm thinking about developing a crush on one of them, I want to make sure it's someone you're not into. That wouldn't be cool." You plan your crushes in advance? Alden asked with interest. I've never heard anyone mention that it was an option. I got burned last time. I could like Elijah. She's funny and cute. All your intake friends are hot. And she's 17, but she didn't treat me like a kid. She didn't make a big deal out of any of the things people usually care about. Probably because she is not from here. And I don't think she was mad when my self-confidence chain made me tell her she looked amazing in the bikini. He bit his lip. She seemed happy I'd complimented her, right? It wasn't too much that I looked up how to say it in Lithuanian. Alden was growing more and more sure that the self-confidence chain was dangerous. I must have missed that one while I was watching the fireworks. It's fine with me if you develop a crush on Elijah. She isn't dating anyone as far as I've heard. Do you? Am I supposed to ask her if she likes you back? That sounded so awkward. But Alden had encountered a lot of people asking about crushes recently. Marisol had asked her roommates if they liked him. Her roommates and others at the party had asked him if he liked her. Jeremy had a serious girlfriend. Maybe it was just time for them all to be doing this kind of crush-checking regularly. I'll murder you if you do, said Lute. Or not. Just offering, said Alden. Anyway, go for it. I heard she scared some assholes who were giving Natalie a hard time into leaving intake early, and she's so positive about everything on Nzidora, and she's good at funny mean greater than. I think she's cool. You just use our tone in casual convo. Luke shook his head. You really are in the wrong language class. Line of asterisks. Before their last few minutes in the privacy booth were up, Luke gave Alden 2 jewelry-sized boxes. One had an inch-long silver piece of metal in it, shaped like a rounded rectangle with a hole in the center. It's a chain link, said Lute. Symbolic. You can earn more by being a good word chain user in the Palace of Unbreaking's eyes. It doesn't do anything or get you anything, but you can string them together and feel proud of yourself. Like earning badges or gold stars. Yes. But alien, Lute said dramatically. Don't throw it away. You're supposed to keep it with you at all times. I don't even do that with mine. Just shove it somewhere where you won't lose it. I keep them in my closet. The second jewelry box had a flattened piece of cloudy crystal about the size and shape of a checker. I was surprised when he said he was going to give you this. Luke stared at it. Apparently, it's because you're an avowed. They don't give them out to most of the palace members. Just some people. It's more inconvenient than the chain link. If you don't want to use it, you should give it me, and I'll do it for you. What is it? Alden asked. The small piece was heavy in his hand. It reminded him of the material the trading table had been made of in a consulate building. It's an opposite stone. If you have it with you while you perform a word chain, it glows for the person that has the other one. It's really just symbolic in your case. I checked. They don't know what you've cast, and they don't become your literal opposite for chains. It's going to be a notification toy for you and the person who has the other half. But it probably means a lot to that person. Because they got a stone suddenly when almost nobody else gets one. I need to do it every time. No. But if you're not going to do it at least every few weeks, I'll take it. Lute held out his hand. Alden looked at him. Do you want me to give it to you? He asked. I will. But it won't be trouble to stick this in a pocket or something while I cast. If you're sure you'll do it, that would be best, Luke said slowly. But I know it's a pain to keep track of a little thing that's not actually significant to you. I ran mine through a washing machine a few times because I forgot about it. Which was very crappy of me. He's serious about the rock, thought Alden. That seemed odd. Lute was even pretty casual about the ledger. He didn't think it would be a big deal to Paradatur if Alden botched word chains every now and then, but he clearly didn't want him to mess up with the opposite stone. Even though he'd just said it was only a toy. I'll be careful with it. Lute was still staring at it. I'm great at carrying random objects. It's what I do. If I'm not using word chains for a few weeks, I'll pass it off to you. How about that? Lute finally dropped his hand. That would be. It's better if it's you. Your opposite will be so honored that it feels wrong to lie about who's making their rock blink. But they might be crushed if the rock never blinks. And I don't know if they get to keep being your opposite if you lose your stone. They might assign you someone else for some crazy Artonian reason. It's a religious artifact for them. I get it. I'll be careful. Another thing struck him suddenly. You said the palace is giving it to me because I'm an avowed. And you think the opposite will be honored. They're not a wizard, then. It was the natural conclusion to draw. An avowed got the special rock when most ordinary word chain students didn't. And regular people could cast word chains. The palace probably had a large non-wizard class membership. Most likely not, said Lute. He sat down on the green velvet chair again and started putting on his shoes. It'll be someone your age. Born on the same day as you, as close to the same minute as possible. They go all in on the matching if they can. Oh, said Alden. He smiled down at the stone. So they're a kid. And Artonan exactly his age should be physically and emotionally closer to human 12. That's amazing, imagining that someone born the same minute as me might be holding their stone right now, too. Lute finished tying his laces, then stood up. All right. Money spent. Tutoring completed. Bed jumped on. Alien gifts given. Some chainer secrets revealed. Crush selected, Alden added, reaching for his own shoes. Crush selected, Lute repeated. Wavy fruit. He craned his neck toward the case the fruit had come in. I just finished the last bite, said Alden. And because of that, I may need to stop by a dispensary when we leave for another one of those unruly stomach injectors. My guts are wondering why I've chosen to put a whole raw custard-flavored pumpkin in them on a beautiful Saturday. We all make sacrifices for the unbreaking, greater than Lute intoned as he collected all the things they'd be taking with them when they left. Thank you for teaching me. This was awesome of you. It's great for me, but you're getting nothing out of it except for tons of my company. It's not like I have a glorious social life. I would just be sitting around playing my harp and studying. Still, said Alden. If you think of some way for me to return the favor, let me know. Tomorrow. The girls? That's just me having a good time with all of you, Lute. It wasn't a favor last weekend, and it isn't this one either. And now I'm asking you to spend even more time on the phone with me while I go down to F and possibly piss off a mind-control brute lady. Lute was quiet for a second. Then he said, well, that's just me having a good time with you, Alden. I'll watch you piss off brute ladies every weekend. It sounds very entertaining. Alden laughed. Sorry, but I hope it's boring for you. I want to get to her apartment and find out that she's not even there. If she's at the healing hospital right now getting checked for mental manipulation like I recommended, that would be the best possible outcome. Fine. I'll root for that this weekend. But next weekend I'm rooting for a brute lady to take a swing at you. Alden stood and looked around the privacy booth. He made a decision. Hey, the thing on my profile that made your boss excited. Lute's eye fixed on him. It's not something I'm embarrassed about, but it doesn't feel like me. I don't know how people will see it, and I definitely don't want to introduce myself to everyone I meet that way and then have to, prove it with every breath I take. He shrugged uncomfortably. Anyway. It's just a commendation. A commendation? Lute's fingers tightened on the box that held Alden's new inkwell and brush. You mean? One for fighting chaos. Like the kind Hoyu's mom has? Does she have one? I didn't know. 2. I think she got one before he was born and another when we were in 7th grade. His dad has one. I've heard him mention them before. And there were a couple other people in our school whose parents had one. Lute looked away from Alden to stare at the cut crystal sconce on the wall in front of him. Most of them were really proud. Mine's not for fighting chaos, said Alden. I was sitting in a little bit of chaos for months and trying to stay alive, and then I was running away from it. The commendation is for taking care of someone while I was there and taking her with me when I left. I think. They just gave it to me. It's not like there was an explanation. Lute didn't say anything. I figured you were probably curious. And I've learned a lot about your chainer stuff, Alden said. I'm sure the faculty know, and I trust you more than any of them, so there's no real reason to keep it a secret. I just don't want people to look at me and think guy with alien accolade instead of guy trying to remember how to do high school. Yeah, you're terrible at that, said Lute. You speak fluent Artoman, you study way too much, and you try to save cultists. You need to get some chewing gum stuck to your learning cushion next week, accidentally set one of your rugs on fire, and fail to turn in homework. Then you'll be cured. Alden felt relieved. I did set a shirt on fire. Oh right. The tag tried to kill you, so you defeated it with your spell impression. Luke gave him a half smile. Thanks for telling me. It's cool. It's just a thing that happened. Which commendation is it? Luke asked. I know there are different ones. It's for exceptional bravery in the absence of obligation. Well, that confirms that your heart really does burn sinners to death. Shut up. I can't help that words have meanings, man. The meaning of those words isn't open to interpretation. No one made you be brave, and you chose to do it anyway. It really is just a thing that happened. I won't bother you about it, Luke said. I do understand wanting to be high school guy instead of something else. And it would be peculiar to introduce yourself to people with, "Hi. I'm Alden the Commanded One." Don't do that. Everyone will think you have issues. Alden snorted. I'll try to avoid it. By the way, I don't want Hoyu and Lexi to hear about it yet. Luke looked surprised. You haven't told Hoyu? No. I only told you because we're getting to know each other and your boss was acting like I had a supernova in my chest. It was nice of you not to push for info. You should tell Hoyu. You two get along so well and he's going to be thrilled. He'll probably carry you home to his mother like, look. I found another one of you. Compare stars while I take notes. I'll tell him if it comes up naturally. I'm not desperate to keep it from him or anything. I kind of want to do better in gym before it comes out, though. That's random. I'm positive they only let me into the hero program because of the commendation, Alden explained. And not because it says I'm brave. They didn't talk about bravery at all in my interview. I don't think they consider it the most necessary quality. They were just afraid of making the Artonans mad or something, so here I am. I'd like to show all of my classmates I don't suck before they find out about the star and start guessing about it. Luke's expression darkened. I hadn't thought of that. Being the class weakling is bad. Being the class weakling and having something that will make other people jealous? That can ruin your whole life. I'm not the class weakling. Alden protested. I'm doing well. I just think I can do even better. Luke gave him a look. Be realistic. You could be levitating a meter off the ground, weeping diamonds, and exhaling clouds of poisonous gas, and some of those privileged little rankists would still know right down to their bones that they were better than you because you're only a B. They're not that bad. They are, Lute muttered. Trust me. I know several of the people in your program. Some of them are better than others, and not all of the ones who buy into that mindset are dicks because of it. But it's like, this is the puddle we all grew up swimming in. Even if they understand that it's wrong and they actively try to reject it, they still default to thinking that way a lot of the time. A chime sounded through the room suddenly, and the lights flickered. That's our 2-minute warning, Luke said. Before they open the door and kick us out. I'm ready to go when you are. Alden grabbed the wavy fruit case. None of Parvati's gifts had been sent in anything that looked remotely disposable. The cases, chests, and small boxes were all wood and leather with embroidered cloth interiors. Rich people need to stop giving me things that are too expensive to get rid of. I don't know what my dorm room's going to look like a year from now at this rate. Dozens of boxes full of lavender and alien curios probably. At least he was going to smell good. Luke's fingers hovered over the latch that would open the privacy booth's door. Alden waited, but he just stood there, facing the panel wall. I do think it's amazing, he said as the lights flickered again. The fact that you earned a commendation. I feel like I need be clear about it. I think it's amazing, and I'm glad you made it back to Earth and that you're alive. Alden raised his eyebrows. "Thanks. You don't have to say stuff like that, though." "I do," said Lute, still not looking at him. "Not to make things weird for you or anything, but just so you know. I mean it. I think it's terrible something bad happened to you, and I hope nothing like that happens to you again." He hooked the latch with a finger and pulled before Alden could ask what the sudden change in tone was about. Toad continued, "Thanks for listening.